In Joshua chapter 17 through 21, it lists the inheritance of the various tribes, the cities and the boundaries that were given to each of the tribes. And one thing that people will bring up when they doubt the scriptures is that the prophecies that Jacob spoke over his sons at the end of the book of Genesis don't always seem to match what actually happened in the book of Joshua. For example, let me read some of these to you. The prophecies in Genesis chapter 49 begins with Reuben. I'm going to skip around here a little bit because I don't want to read the whole chapter. It says, Reuben, unstable as water, you shall not excel because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. That refers to when Reuben slept with his father's concubine in a family coup attempt. Now, he didn't disown Reuben, but he did say that even though Reuben was his firstborn, Reuben was unstable. And what happened when they got to the land, instead of going along with the original plan, Reuben says, oh, instead of doing that, I want to take this other land over here on the east side of the Jordan. Changing plans on the fly is one of the characteristics of someone who is unstable. Move on to Simeon and Levi in verse 7. Jacob says, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that's exactly what happened. Levi was scattered all over the 12 tribes. They had cities scattered all over, 48 cities in total. They didn't have a single territory all to themselves, but only had these individual cities. Simeon was given a single territory within the territory of Judah, but they didn't keep it. Instead, they ended up migrating north and being scattered among all of the tribes. So even though their boundaries initially were a discrete territory, that's not the way it ended up over time. And one of the things you'll find out when you read through these things in details and through all the stories over time is that the boundaries of the tribes were very fluid. They were fuzzy to begin with. There weren't very specific boundary stones set up. Some tribes had cities and territories within other tribes, and the boundaries flexed a lot. They moved back and forth depending on economic conditions and wars and conflicts. The next one is Zebulon. In Genesis 49:13 it says, Zebulon shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. The description of the territory of Zebulun in Joshua is totally landlocked. So how could he be a haven for ships? And he's nowhere near Sidon. Except that the boundaries for Zebulun changed a lot over time. Sometimes he bordered on the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes he bordered on the Mediterranean right next to the city of Sidon. So that prophecy was also fulfilled. Issachar. Issachar is a strong donkey lying between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Issachar's territory included the valley of Jezreel, which we also call the valley of Megiddo or Armageddon. It was an extremely fertile valley, and it was a haven for kings when they fled for battles. But it was also a focus of war. Many armies fought over that valley because it was so rich. And so Zebulun's land was pleasant, but he lived under a burden. Verse 17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. Dan's initial territory was in the south next to Judah, right on the border of the Philistines. But they were never able to take all of their territory, and they actually lost some of it from the Philistines. And so a significant portion of Dan moved to the far north. And so if you followed what was known as the King's Highway, all through Mesopotamia, down into Canaan, and then became the way of the Philistines, which was mentioned in Exodus, it passed through Dan at the very edge of both ends of the land of Israel. At the very north, Dan was the first territory you would enter. And at the very south, Dan was the territory where you would leave. Or coming from Egypt, it would be the other way around, through the Philistine territory into Dan, all through Israel, and then out again through Dan at the north. Joseph, which is Manasseh and Ephraim, in Genesis 49, verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. And there's quite a bit more for Joseph. But the gist is that his brothers were jealous of him and attacked him, but he came out on top, and he became the most fruitful of all. And that's exactly right. Ephraim and Manasseh together occupied more territory than any of the other tribes. Manasseh by itself had the largest territory. It might have even rivaled Judah. And Ephraim was by far the most powerful tribe of the northern kingdoms, and sometimes the most powerful tribe of all of them. And Benjamin, in verse 27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Now Benjamin was a relatively small tribe, and their territory was right between Judah and Ephraim. So they were a point of conflict, and their territory was actually divided between the northern and southern kingdoms when they split. But Benjamin was also the focus of a lot of conflict within Israel. Other than the conflict between the north and south tribes. When you remember the story about the Levite who, when he was traveling through Benjamin, he stopped in a city, and it was just like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The house he was staying in was surrounded by the men of the city, and they raped and murdered his concubine, and he cut her up into 12 pieces and sent her all over the nation, and all the tribes came together and made war on Benjamin. Benjamin was not a peaceful people. They were warriors. This was the tribe that Saul came from, and they were frequently in trouble. So the blessings and cursings that Jacob spoke over his sons did come to pass, even though it's hard to see it sometimes in the narrative, because borders change. They didn't all come to pass at the same time or in the same way. Sometimes it took 1,000 years. But eventually, all of Jacob's prophecy over his sons came true. So don't doubt. The Bible always comes out on top. Archaeologists are always finding new things that prove the Bible true and all the doubters wrong. So whenever anyone comes to you and says, well, the Bible contradicts itself because of this or that, it's almost always because they're ignoring the most likely interpretations of Scripture, or they just don't know the evidence. It's almost always an argument from ignorance. Those people just don't know what they're talking about. The Bible is reliable from start to finish. This is Jay Carper from American Torah. Be blessed.